community video series. In today's video, we are going to be looking at the Care Cluster Connector, what their role is and how to be a Care Cluster Connector. So the first thing we're going to do is review what congregational care clusters are at Cedar Park United and what we hope they will be going into the future. Then we're going to look at what the role of a care cluster connector is and how to do it. It's also going to be worthwhile, I think, to look at the question of what might go wrong and also what might go right. There'll be chance for me in this to answer some of the questions that have already been asked about being a care cluster connector, and then I'll end the video with what's next, the material that we'll be sending out to you as we go ahead. So first, looking at what a congregational care cluster is. Right back at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were barely a few weeks in and we had no idea what COVID was going to do to us, I was very concerned about the families with small children and isolated seniors, in fact, everybody in our congregation, and how to keep connected to them in a caring way. And so we set to and we divided up everybody's names into geographic clusters. And then we created a whole system of being able to connect with everybody. It was a caring safety net, if you will, so that particularly those who are isolated members were not overlooked. As the pandemic progressed and as we got into this process, the clusters became a network for Cedar Parkers, their peers, and their neighbors. And in fact, some people discovered that they were neighbors with people they didn't know lived close by. It provided this additional layer of connection to and from members of the community with those of us who were working in the church. It was at this time that we also created the Congregational Care email. This became a way that anybody, anytime, could get in touch with us to let us know if they or someone in their cluster was in particular need of some care or attention. Now, during this time, a number of other congregations adopted our congregational care cluster system and did so with similar success. And a couple of these congregations have decided that the benefits were too good to let go of once the initial crisis of the pandemic was over. And so they are now leading us to see that these three features of the original care cluster can be invaluable for ordinary times too. So what is the role of a care cluster connector? Simply, it is to make that connection with all members of a cluster 2 times per year. With a connector, we can add a human voice. That can be via personal email and or a phone call or a front porch conversation. It helps us to ensure that information goes in both directions, news from the church to you and news from congregants back to the church. And a last feature of this that we're going to talk about today is how these connectors will be guided in how to manage healthy boundaries. And one way to look at that is to say, well, what is a cluster connector not to do? They are not to be a caregiver, nor are they to be a problem fixer, or a stand-in for a family or a minister, nor should they be a secret keeper. Now, this last one is a little complicated, a little tricky. Let me give an example. If a conversation starts to get into personal criticisms, for example, of a staff member or another congregation member, it's not going to be a connector's job to somehow protect the victims of those criticisms by not sharing. So if you get yourself into that situation and somebody starts to say, well, don't tell so-and-so, but, then we're encouraging you to politely stop the conversation there and say, I'd rather you didn't tell me anything I cannot share with the ministry team. That's probably going to be the most tricky situation, but so far it has not happened. So part of it is just learning to remind ourselves what we're not when we're doing this connection. In your information script, you're going to find information that gives you a few more examples of how you can do these clear boundary setting, where you get to draw your lines with what you do and do not do as a connector. So maybe that's the question we should answer now. How do I do this? Well, first thing is to do it in a way that is both intentional and natural to you and to your cluster. You might want to use the phone or email or a card or drop by in person if that person happens to live very close by. We will be giving you a prepared script as a guide that we suggest to you you adapt so that it sounds more like you and less like me. That you also keep notes of your conversations, not extensive notes, but just enough to aid your memory so that when you pass back information to us, you've got the details right. And that last piece is about appropriate sharing of news with the Cedar Park team. And again, the focus of this is connection and care. So it doesn't need to be all of the details of the grandkids' actions, but just simply, is somebody going into the hospital? Is somebody dealing with chemotherapy? Those sorts of things where we can add a layer of prayer and attention. What might go wrong, you may be asking? Well, the ones that we can think of are nobody in my cluster wants a telephone call. Or nobody's reading their emails. I sent something days ago. It's still not in. The other one is around expectation gaps. And again, that's about healthy boundaries. Somebody may expect you to come in to be their carer. That is not your job. So who does the caring and who solves the problem? The simplest answer to both of those is if you are a care cluster connector, it's not your job to do those things. And that last one is dealing with difficult responses. But the flip side to what may go wrong is what might go right. One of the things we've discovered is that neighbors get to know each other a little better. Some clusters, as is the case in some of the congregations who are using this process, they've decided to gather informally just for friendship and connection. That is absolutely okay, but it's also not essential. It does result in people feeling more connected with their faith and their faith community. The other thing that can happen is cross-generational connections and new friendships. It's also a way for us as a congregation to reconnect with those who are isolated or who have drifted away. So that's the role of the connector and a little bit of how to do it. Now I'm just going to finish this video by saying what's going to happen next. The next thing is that we find out how many of you are willing to be a connector 2 times in the year. And then we will pair you with a cluster. We will send you your script and with enough time for you to adapt it so that it sounds a bit like you. We will share with you the time frame for making these connections 2 times per year. And it depends when you're watching this video as to whether you will be coming on board in time for a fall connector or a spring connector time. And obviously what's next after that is to do those connections within a time frame, to record enough information so that you can share it with us and then share those updates with the ministry team. So where is your material? Well, once you've watched the video and even saved it on your computer so you can watch it again, connect with us by using this email. When you've done that, we will send you by email all of the items I've described, the script, the cluster member information, the timeline, and a couple of methods for keeping your records so you can record it and send it back to us. Thank you for watching this video. If you have more questions, use that email and we'll be in touch with you. And thank you for considering this really important connective role within our congregation. Thank you and God bless.